So green chemistry is going to finish off this topic. So there are bits you need to learn for green chemistry, but most of it you just need to be able to apply to different reactions that they're going to give you in exam paper. So when we do papers, often they'll say, is how can this process, oh, here are 2 ways of making this chemical, which one is preferable in terms of green chemistry and so on. How can we reduce the damage to the environment? So these are the principles that you need to think about. First one, they kind of make sense. The first one is we need to reduce hazardous waste chemicals, or we use fewer chemicals in the industrial processes. So we design processes where we're producing fewer hazardous waste chemicals, and ideally we use fewer chemicals in the actual process. We design processes which have a high atom economy. We try and use renewable resources, so things from plants and so on, rather than having to use crude oil. So, for example, well, we'll look at this, but one example would be plastics, that we can create plastics using plant-based materials rather than crude oil. Using alternative energy sources to fossil fuels, so perhaps we can use solar power or so on, or wind power to generate the electricity, rather than having to burn fossil fuels to heat reactions up. And we ensure that waste products, where we can, are non-toxic, or we can recycle them, or they're biodegradable. So it's just trying to reduce the impact that the chemical industry has had on the environment. And this is quite a new thing. This is kind of like the last 10 years or so has really taken off, and there's a lot of money to actually be made of this now, is trying to change the way we currently make common products into a more sustainable way. So we're going to look at examples. Now the examples we're going to go, you don't need to learn, we just need to be able to understand. So one of the examples is that we have reduced, well, we've eliminated lead being used in petrol. So petrol always used to contain lead. We've reduced that. Lead is a toxic chemical, not good for us to be breathing in. So we have reduced hazardous chemicals. It wasn't of any, well, it used to be produced in the field. We've managed to change the way that we have the fuel and design our car engines so we no longer need to have lead in our petrol. So that's one way that as a society we've improved the environment. Rather than using ozone depleting products in fire extinguishers and so on, we have developed foams that can put out fires effectively. Before that, we would put out a fire using halogen-alkanes that we looked at that damage the ozone layer are really good because they're non-flammable. So if you've got your deodorant can, you couldn't set it alight because if it contains CFCs, they're non-flammable. And so they're often used to put out fires, because if you cover a fire in it, it stops it. But you can use foams instead, which put the fire out, but they don't produce the nasty waste chemicals as well. Solvents are particularly hazardous. Solvents are, we dissolve things up in often like chlorinated solvents, which are really damaging for the environment. Rather than doing that, we try and design reactions which we don't need solvents for as well. Dry cleaning, do any of you use dry cleaning at all? Dry cleaning generally involves pretty nasty chemicals that you put your clothes in. Dry cleaning is not that it's dry, it just means you don't use water. Yeah, so you use a different solvent to put your clothes in. Often they are highly toxic, nasty solvents to use. But you can use something called supercritical carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide, what would happen if I just release carbon dioxide in the environment naturally, so it's not going to cause damage. I know you can think of global warming, but if we got it from the environment, from the atmosphere initially, it doesn't cause any net gain in carbon dioxide. Fossil fuels, we are trying to stop using fossil fuels. If you looked at alcohols, you maybe looked at fueling cars through alcohols. Yeah, if you looked at ethanol as a fuel in cars, and the fact you can make it in hotter countries for fermentation and so on, which is always good. And finally, I'm sure you're all very good citizens and you always recycle, don't you? So all those plastics you put in your plastic big bin, to recycle them, to make sure that they are not being dumped and harming the environment. So glass has been recycled for umpteen years, since I was a boy, so that's a long time ago. Metals are really good to recycle. Metals are incredibly expensive to keep buying, so metals can be recycled, and increasingly plastics as well. So again, you don't need to learn those, you just need to be able to relate it to the reaction we're doing. So these are other things. This is really key, and this is something to think about, and you'll talk about this in more depth later on. The apparent benefits of green chemistry may be offset by unexpected and detrimental side effects. So, can anybody think of an example where that could happen? So if you think back to your alcohol chemistry, say I'm in Brazil, and I think, right, okay, I'm going to grow sugarcane because I'm going to make more money because I can produce ethanol to fuel cars. If I was a farmer, what would I have been producing before that? I'm going to sell my sugarcane to fuel cars. What would I be? If I'm a farmer, what would I be growing? I'd be growing crops to feed people. So if I stop growing crops to feed people, what's going to happen to the amount of food available?
It's going to
Decrease. So what happens to prices?
It's going to go up, rise.
It goes up. So I may think we're doing a good thing by stopping, by producing sugarcane to fuel cars, because I think, oh, that's pretty good, that's good for the environment, and I can make some money from that. However, that causes food prices to rise, which means that poorer people can then no longer buy. You know, in the West we'd be okay. Prices go up by a bit. Most of us, okay, we can sort of like go with that. But poorer nations, suddenly the food price starts going up because we will continue to buy it because we've generally got the money to do that. However, poorer nations suddenly can't afford food anymore because there's less food available. Another side effect, if I, you know, where's a good place to grow sugarcane with nice fertile soil, where it's nice and warm, what gets cut down in order to grow sugarcane, do you think? If I'm in Brazil, yeah, the rainforest, which are, you know, so essential to moderate the world's weather, and I suddenly decide to cut down some trees, generally cut them down and burn them, which is not a good idea. Important to establish international cooperation to reduce the reduction. Again, this is kind of, it's not just us, you know, it's just not just one country doing this, it's got to be a worldwide thing. So there are things that we've looked at already, but there's also, again, you don't need to know these, but there's the Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer, so that would be reducing CFCs and so on. There's also a global treaty on stopping organic pollutants that get into the system, so stopping nasty organic chemicals getting into our oceans and the water table and so on. And there's also the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development as well, where most of the world has got together, particularly the industrial nations, just said, look, we need to act on this. And so lots of people are throwing money into this area of green chemistry, and it's generally taken things. The emphasis has stopped to an extent on developing new products, but making the products we already have, but in a more environmentally friendly way. Because if people could do that, they could say, right, to make this product, you don't need to produce all these waste chemicals. You can increase your atom economy, that's good, and you don't produce so many waste chemicals that are toxic to the environment, which is also good.